You are listening to HOA Neighbor Wars. I was shoveling, and she was screaming. The tow operator asked for paperwork, and Karen screamed that her authority was the paperwork and the hook was going on now. I stood there in my driveway at 6 in the morning, snow falling so hard I could barely see the clubhouse 200 feet away, and watched a flatbed tow truck idle behind my work vehicle while Melissa Young, the Beacon Hill Snowdrift Winter Compliance Association Rules Interpretation Chair, propped a snow W pusher against my bumper like she was planting a flag. She turned to me, eyes wild, breath fogging in short bursts, and said, "I will re-inspect in 15 minutes and you will fail if you stall." I am a city parks employee in St. George, Utah. I know permits, I know right-of-way rules, and I know that my blue work truck sits in my own driveway on my own property. The snowstorm hit overnight, 6 inches by morning, and I woke up to pounding on my door and the diesel rumble of a commercial tow rig parked at the curb. Melissa was already on my porch with a clipboard, a stainless travel mug in her other hand, yelling that my truck violated emergency snow clearance protocol because the snow on the hood had not been brushed off within 4 hours of accumulation. I asked her what protocol. She said the Winter Emergency Addendum, effective immediately, adopted by the board 2 nights ago in a closed session. I said, I never got notice. She said notice was posted in the clubhouse lobby and that was sufficient under the covenants. I said my small business reputation depends on having this truck ready at dawn because I supervise trail maintenance and snow removal for the city. And if she tows it, I lose a day of work and the city loses a vehicle. She actually laughed, and said, I do not negotiate with winter violations. The tow operator climbed out of the cab, a younger guy in a reflective vest, and walked over. He looked uncomfortable. He asked Melissa for the signed authorization. She waved the clipboard at him and said her signature was all he needed. He said he usually got a board-signed work order. She said she wrote the covenants and her authority was absolute in snow emergencies. He looked at me. I shook my head and said I did not consent. Melissa stepped between us and said, "We can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works." I stayed calm. I had to. Yelling would not help, and Melissa was already recording the whole thing on her phone, angling it so my breath fog would make the audio sound harsher. That was her move, bait me into raising my voice so she could play victim later. I did not give her the opening. Instead, I pulled out my own phone, started recording, and asked the tow operator his name and company. He gave it. I asked if he verified the vehicle was abandoned or illegally parked. He said no. I asked if he confirmed the property owner authorized the tow. He hesitated. Melissa cut in and said the HOA owns the enforcement authority and I had no say. I let her talk, because every word was helping me. I had been documenting her gate access failures, her selective enforcement calls, and every contradictory email she sent for 3 months. She did not know that yet. The tow operator looked at his phone, then at Melissa, then back at me. He said he needed to call his supervisor. Melissa exploded. She said the hook was going on now or she would report his company for non-compliance. He said he was not hooking anything until his supervisor cleared it. She screamed that she would have his business license revoked. He got back in his cab and made a call. Melissa turned on me. She said I had 15 minutes to move the truck into the garage or she would cite me for obstruction and add a $500 fine. I asked where that number came from. She said the emergency addendum allowed instant fines for life safety violations. I said snow on a parked truck hood was not a life safety violation. She said it was a visual obstruction that created a hazard for snow removal equipment. I said the truck was in my driveway, not in the street. She said the driveway entrance was within the HOA easement, and subject to line-of-sight rules during active snow events. I pointed out that my driveway entrance was fully on my lot, 10 feet inside the property line. She said the covenant map showed a different boundary, and I would need to hire a surveyor to prove otherwise. I said I already had the survey. She said it was not an HOA-approved survey. I asked who approved surveys. She said the compliance committee which she chaired. I said that was circular. She said I could appeal to the board, but the fine was effective immediately and the tow was proceeding. The tow operator got out again. He said his supervisor told him not to hook without a signed board authorization on letterhead. Melissa lost it. She yelled that she was the board, that her word was policy, and that he was interfering with HOA governance. He said he was protecting his company from liability. She said she would sue. He said that was fine, but he was leaving. He climbed back in the cab, put the truck in gear, and drove off. Melissa stood there, snow piling on her hood, staring at the tire tracks, breathing hard. She turned to me and said this was not over. She said she was issuing the fine anyway, and I had until noon to pay, or she would add interest and levy a lien. I said I would not pay a fine for something that was not a violation. She said refusal to pay was itself a violation and would double the penalty. I said she could mail me the paperwork and I would respond through my attorney. She said the association did not accept attorney correspondence during active enforcement and that any legal costs would be added to my account. I said that was not how any of this worked. She said it was how Beacon Hill worked and I should have read the rules before I bought here. I moved here 2 years ago because the neighborhood was quiet and close to work. The HOA seemed normal at first, basic landscaping rules and architectural approval for exterior changes. Then Melissa got elected to the compliance committee and everything changed. She started doing snow patrols at 5 in the morning, taking photos of every driveway, every walkway, every roof edge. She measured shovel widths, ice melt coverage, snowbank heights. She invented standards that did not exist in the covenants and enforced them like they were carved in stone. She targeted anyone who pushed back, and the board let her because she did the work and they did not want the complaints. I became a target the first time I questioned her. It was early December, a light dusting, maybe an inch. She left a notice on my door saying my front walk was not cleared within 3 hours of snowfall and I owed a $50 fine. I looked at the covenant section she cited and it said reasonable effort within a reasonable time. I emailed the board and asked what reasonable meant. Melissa replied and said 3 hours was the standard, and my email was argumentative and subject to harassment sanctions. I called the property management company. They said Melissa handled compliance and they did not override her unless there was a legal issue. I asked what counted as a legal issue. They said contact an attorney. That was when I started keeping records. I logged every notice, every email, every phone call. I photographed timestamps, weather reports, my own cleared walkways. I noticed Melissa never tagged certain driveways even when they were worse than mine. I started mapping it. One neighbor, 2 doors down, left his walk uncleared for a week and got nothing. Another neighbor had a snowbank blocking half the sidewalk for 10 days, no notice. I asked Melissa about it in an email. She said those were compliance matters under review and I was not authorized to question enforcement priorities. I asked the board again. No response. Melissa showed up at my door the next week with a vendor. She said she was verifying compliance and the vendor needed to inspect my garage for snow equipment storage. I said I did not consent to an inspection. She said the covenants allowed spot checks for safety compliance. I said the covenants allowed inspections of exterior visible features, not interiors. She said snow equipment storage was a safety issue and refusal would be noted as obstruction. The vendor, a guy in a contractor jacket, looked embarrassed. I asked him who hired him. He said the HOA compliance chair. I asked if he had a work order. He said Melissa told him it was urgent. I told him he was leaving. Melissa said I was interfering with official HOA business. I closed the door. She sent an attorney letter 3 days later. It was 5 pages of bluff language, saying I was in violation of multiple covenant sections, that I had obstructed an authorized inspection, and that I owed $900 in fines and legal fees. It said I had 10 days to pay, or the HOA would file a lien and pursue foreclosure. I read it twice. It was nonsense. The covenant sections she cited did not say what she claimed. I called a local mediator, a retired attorney named Paul who specialized in HOA disputes. He looked at the letter and the covenants and said Melissa was quoting the wrong clauses and the board had no authority to levy fines without a hearing. He said I should demand a hearing in writing and document everything. I sent a certified letter to the board requesting a hearing. I attached my records, the photos, the emails, the covenant sections proving Melissa was wrong. I got a reply from the property management company saying the board had reviewed my request and determined that Melissa's enforcement was proper and the fines were valid. No hearing date. No explanation. Just a statement that payment was due in 5 days or interest would accrue. I called Paul. He said this was bad faith and I should file a complaint with the state HOA office. I did. They said they would investigate, but it could take months. Melissa ramped up. She started doing double patrols, morning and evening. She left notices for things that did not exist. One morning I woke up to a notice saying my snow boots, which I had left outside my door for 5 minutes while I grabbed my keys, were clutter and subject to immediate removal. She took a photo. The boots were gone when I came back out. I found them 2 days later in the clubhouse lost and found with a $10 retrieval fee attached. I refused to pay. Melissa sent an email saying the fee was now $20 and would increase daily. Another time she showed up while I was shoveling and said my technique was creating a slip hazard because I was piling snow too close to the walkway edge. I asked how far the pile should be. She said 18 inches minimum. I asked where that was written. She said it was implied in the safety standards. I said there were no safety standards in the covenants. She said the board adopted them in executive session. I said executive sessions were for personnel and legal issues, not policy. She said I was not qualified to interpret board procedures. I kept shoveling. She stood there with her stainless travel mug, watching, taking notes on her clipboard. When I finished, she said I had failed to clear the area within the required time frame and I owed another $50. I stopped responding to her directly. I sent everything to the board and copied Paul. The board ignored it. Paul said they were hoping I would give up or move. I said I was not moving. He said then I needed to force the issue. He suggested I start attending board meetings and asking questions on the record. I did. The meetings were monthly, held in the clubhouse, open to homeowners. I showed up in January. Melissa was at the head table with 3 board members. She saw me and her face went tight. I sat in the back and waited for public comment. When my turn came, I stood up and asked why I was being fined for violations that did not exist in the covenants. Melissa said this was not the forum for individual disputes. I said I was not disputing, I was asking for clarification. One of the board members, an older guy named Ron, said Melissa handled compliance and the board trusted her judgment. I asked if the board had reviewed my hearing request. Ron said they had and determined no hearing was necessary. I asked under what authority. Melissa said the board had discretion under the governance bylaws. I asked to see the bylaws. She said they were available for inspection by appointment. I said I wanted an appointment. She said she would check the calendar. I never got an appointment. Instead, I got another notice, this time for my work truck. Melissa said the truck was commercial equipment and not allowed in residential driveways under the aesthetic standards. I pointed out that the covenants allowed work vehicles as long as they were not used for on-site business. She said the truck had city logos and that constituted advertising. I said it was a government vehicle and exempt. She said there was no exemption. I pulled up the covenant section. It said personal vehicles used for employment were permitted. She said the section was outdated and superseded by a board resolution. I asked for the resolution. She said it was in the minutes. I asked for the minutes. She said they were under review and not yet published. This went on for weeks. Every time I cleared something up, Melissa invented a new violation. When I piled snow away from the walk, she said the pile was too high and blocked sight lines. When I spread it thin, she said it created a melt hazard. When I used ice melt, she said I used too much and it was damaging the landscaping. When I used less, she said I was not meeting the safety standard. It was a game, and she was making up the rules as she went. Then came the package pile confrontation. I had been ordering supplies online, winter gear and replacement parts for equipment, and a bunch of boxes showed up on the same day. I stacked them on the porch to bring inside after work. I was gone maybe 6 hours. When I got home, Melissa was on my porch taking photos. She said the boxes were clutter and violated the exterior appearance standards. I said they were deliveries and I was moving them inside. She said they had been there for hours, and that was long enough to constitute storage. I said that was absurd. She said the board would decide. I grabbed the boxes and dragged them inside while she kept filming, narrating into her phone that I was hostile and uncooperative. That night, my doorbell camera caught her doing a late-night snow patrol. It was almost midnight. She walked up my driveway with a flashlight and a clipboard, stopped at my front door, and posted a notice. The camera got the whole thing, clear video, timestamp, her face visible. The notice said I had failed to clear ice accumulation on my porch step and owed $75. I checked the step. There was no ice. The temperature had been above freezing all day. I saved the video and sent it to Paul. He said this was harassment, and I should file a police report. I did. The officer who took the report said it was a civil matter and I should pursue it through the HOA process or small claims court. I went back to the board. I brought the video, the records, the emails, everything. I asked for a formal hearing. Ron said they would schedule one. Melissa said the video was irrelevant because the compliance process was independent of individual grievances. I said she was on my property at midnight posting false notices. She said she was performing her duties as compliance chair. I said her duties did not include trespassing. She said the covenants gave the HOA access to all properties for inspection purposes. I said access required notice and consent. She said emergency inspections were exempt. I said there was no emergency. She said ice was always an emergency. The hearing never happened. Instead, the board sent a letter saying they had reviewed my complaint and found that Melissa acted within her authority and all fines were valid. The letter said I now owed over $2,000 in fines, late fees, and administrative costs. It said if I did not pay within 30 days, the HOA would place a lien on my property and pursue collection. I called Paul. He said this was retaliation and possibly illegal. He said I should gather everything I had and prepare for a real fight. I started building the case. I pulled every email Melissa sent, every notice she posted, every fine she levied. I cross-referenced them with the covenant sections she cited. Almost none of them matched. She was quoting clauses out of context, inventing standards, and applying rules that did not exist. I mapped her enforcement pattern. I found 15 other homeowners she targeted, most of them people who questioned her or attended board meetings. I found 10 homeowners she never touched, even when their violations were worse. One of them was a board member. Another was her next-door neighbor. Then I found the smoking gun. I pulled the HOA access logs from the gate system, public record under the bylaws. Melissa had admin access to the gate and used it constantly, but there were repeated access failures tied to her account. Failed attempts, error codes, override attempts. I cross-referenced the dates with her snow patrols. She was trying to access the system late at night and getting locked out, then coming back during business hours and forcing manual overrides. The logs showed she was violating the access policy, and the board did not know or did not care. I compiled everything into a timeline. I documented every violation notice, every false claim, every contradictory email. I showed how she targeted me after I questioned her, how she escalated when I pushed back, how she invented rules and ignored the covenants. I showed the access log failures and connected them to her late-night patrols. I showed the selective enforcement, the trespassing, the harassment. I had 30 pages of evidence, photos, videos, records, and witness statements from other homeowners she targeted. Paul looked at it and said it was airtight. He said I had enough to sue the HOA and Melissa personally for harassment, abusive process, and breach of fiduciary duty. He said I could also file a bar complaint if she had any legal training and was acting as counsel. She did not. But he said the board might be liable for letting her operate without oversight. He said I should send the packet to the board with a demand letter and see if they would settle. I did. I sent the full timeline, the evidence, and a letter demanding they remove all fines, stop the enforcement, and place Melissa on administrative leave pending an independent audit. I gave them 10 days to respond. I got a reply in 3. It was from the property management company, not the board. It said the board had reviewed my submission and rejected all claims. It said Melissa's actions were authorized and proper. It said my continued interference with HOA operations was grounds for additional sanctions. It said they were referring my file to their attorney. 2 days later, the HOA attorney sent a letter. It was shorter than Melissa's first one, but meaner. It said I was making false and defamatory statements about a volunteer board member, that I was disrupting HOA governance, and that if I did not cease immediately, they would seek an injunction and damages. It said all fines were valid and overdue, and the HOA would file a lien within 5 days. I showed it to Paul. He laughed. He said it was a scare tactic, and the attorney probably had not even seen my evidence. He said we should call their bluff. We scheduled a meeting with the board. Paul said we would present the evidence in person and demand they act. If they refused, we would file in court and copy the state HOA office, the insurance carrier, and every homeowner in the neighborhood. He said once the insurance carrier saw the liability exposure, the board would panic. HOAs run on insurance, and no carrier wants to cover an association that tolerates harassment and selective enforcement. The meeting was set for a Tuesday night in February. It was snowing again. Heavy. The kind of storm that shuts everything down. I got to the clubhouse early. Paul met me in the parking lot. Melissa was already inside, sitting at the head table with her clipboard and her stainless travel mug, looking smug. Ron and the other 2 board members were there, along with the property manager, a woman named Linda who always looked exhausted. There were maybe 10 other homeowners in the chairs, people I recognized from the neighborhood, some of them people Melissa had targeted. Paul stood up and introduced himself. He said we were here to address a pattern of selective enforcement and procedural abuse by the compliance chair. He said we had evidence, and we wanted the board to review it before the situation escalated further. Ron said they were willing to listen. Melissa said this was a waste of time and I was trying to intimidate the board. Paul ignored her and started walking through the timeline. He showed the covenant sections Melissa misquoted. He showed the enforcement map proving selective targeting. He showed the access log failures tied to her admin account. He showed the doorbell video of her trespassing at midnight. He showed the notices with false claims, the emails with contradictory instructions, the fines that violated the hearing process. He showed witness statements from other homeowners. He showed the attorney letter that threatened me for exercising my rights. He laid it all out, clean and undeniable, 30 pages of evidence that proved Melissa was operating outside the rules, and the board was letting it happen. Melissa tried to interrupt. Paul said she would have a chance to respond. Ron told her to wait. Paul kept going. He showed the timeline of escalation, how Melissa targeted me after I questioned her, how she invented violations when I complied, how she used her admin access to conduct patrols the board never authorized. He showed the tow truck incident, the vendor inspection attempt, the attorney letter full of bluffs. He showed how the board refused hearings, ignored complaints, and backed Melissa even when she was clearly wrong. Then, he dropped the hammer. He said Melissa was not current on her own HOA dues. He had pulled the account records, public under the bylaws. She was 4 months behind, over $800 overdue. She had been sending enforcement notices and levying fines while she herself was in violation. The room went silent. Melissa turned white. Ron looked at Linda. Linda pulled up her laptop and checked. She nodded. It was true. Ron asked Melissa if it was true. Melissa said her payment was delayed due to a bank issue. Paul said the delay was 16 weeks and the bylaws required board members to be current on all obligations. Melissa said this was a personal attack. Paul said it was public record and directly relevant to her authority. One of the other board members, a younger woman named Alice, said this was a serious problem. Melissa said it was none of their business. Alice said it was exactly their business, because Melissa had been enforcing rules she was not following. Paul said there was more. He said the insurance carrier needed to be notified because the selective enforcement and harassment created liability exposure. He said if the carrier reviewed the evidence, they would likely demand reforms or drop coverage. Ron said that was extreme. Paul said it was reality. He said HOA insurance covered the association for good faith governance, not for deliberate abuse. He said Melissa's actions were documented, intentional, and exposed the HOA to claims from multiple homeowners. He said the board could fix it now or explain it to a judge later. Linda spoke up. She said she had been trying to flag some of Melissa's enforcement decisions for months, but the board did not want to override her. She said the property management company had received complaints from other homeowners, and she was worried about liability. She said if the insurance carrier got involved, the whole association could be in trouble. Ron asked what she recommended. Linda said they needed to suspend Melissa's enforcement authority immediately, conduct an independent audit, and refund any fines that were not properly authorized. Melissa exploded. She said the board had no authority to suspend her. Alice said the board appointed her and could remove her. Melissa said she was elected by the membership. Alice said no, she was appointed by the board to chair the compliance committee. Melissa said this was a coup. Ron said it was accountability. Melissa stood up, grabbed her clipboard and mug, and said she was done with this association and they could all figure it out themselves. She walked out. The door slammed. Snow blew in from the parking lot. Ron looked at Paul and me. He said they would review everything and get back to us. Paul said that was not good enough. He said we needed a commitment tonight or we would file in the morning. Ron said he could not commit without a full board vote. Paul said then call a vote. Alice said she was ready to vote now. The third board member, a quiet guy named Tom, said he agreed. Ron sighed. He said fine, he would make a motion to suspend all enforcement actions pending an audit, refund all contested fines, and remove Melissa from the compliance chair role. Alice seconded. Tom said yes. Ron said yes. It passed. Linda said she would notify the insurance carrier and request guidance. Paul said good. He said we would hold off on filing, but we wanted everything in writing within 48 hours. Ron said they would send a letter. Paul said we also wanted a written apology to every homeowner Melissa targeted. Ron said that was pushing it. Paul said the alternative was litigation and publicity. Ron said fine, they would draft something. We left. It was still snowing. Heavy, the parking lot almost white. Paul said that went better than expected. I said Melissa was going to lose her mind. He said, let her. She had no power now. I asked what happened next. He said the insurance carrier would review the file and probably issue a non-renewal warning unless the board made serious changes. He said selective enforcement and harassment were red flags for carriers because they created liability for discrimination and retaliation claims. He said the board would have to adopt new policies, train the committee members, and probably replace half the leadership. I went home. The next morning I got an email from Linda. It was the letter, signed by Ron, stating that all fines against me were rescinded, my account was cleared, and Melissa Young was removed from the compliance committee effective immediately. It said the board apologized for any inconvenience and was conducting a review of all enforcement actions taken in the past 12 months. It said homeowners with concerns should contact the property management company. 2 days later, I got a call from Paul. He said the insurance carrier had responded. They issued an insurance risk warning and demanded the HOA implement policy reforms within 30 days or face non-renewal. The warning said the association had been operating outside its governing documents, that the selective enforcement created exposure for civil rights and fair housing claims, and that the carrier would not continue coverage without documented corrective action. The board called an emergency meeting. They adopted a new enforcement policy requiring board approval for all fines, mandatory hearings for contested actions, and quarterly audits of compliance decisions. They also voted to hire an independent management company to handle enforcement instead of relying on volunteer committees. Melissa tried to fight it. She sent an email to the whole neighborhood saying the board was corrupt and I had staged a takeover. Nobody responded. She showed up at the next board meeting and demanded reinstatement. Ron said no. She threatened to sue. Ron said go ahead. She never did. By March, she stopped coming to meetings. By April, she put her house on the market. By May, she was gone. The fallout kept spreading. Linda sent letters to all the homeowners Melissa had targeted, offering to review their fines and issue refunds where appropriate. 15 people responded. The board refunded over $12,000 in bogus fines. 3 homeowners filed formal complaints with the state HOA office. The state opened an investigation. The board hired an attorney to help with compliance. The attorney reviewed the covenants and found that half of Melissa's enforcement standards had no legal basis. The board rescinded them. The neighborhood changed. People started attending meetings. The board added 2 new members. They rewrote the compliance policy to include clear standards, timelines, and appeal procedures. They published the meeting minutes online. They hired a professional property manager who actually knew HOA law. The new manager conducted training for all committee members and required them to follow documented procedures. Enforcement became consistent. People stopped getting random notices. The harassment stopped. I kept my records. I updated the timeline through the end of the insurance review and the board reforms. Paul said I should keep everything in case Melissa ever tried to retaliate or someone else on the board decided to go rogue. I backed it all up, digital and paper, and filed it away. I did not need it again. The next winter was different. It snowed just as much, but nobody harassed me about it. I shoveled my walk, cleared my truck, and went to work. No notices. No patrols. No midnight visits. The new compliance committee sent out reminders about ice melt and snow removal, but they were reasonable, polite, and tied to actual safety concerns. When I had a question, I called the property manager and got a straight answer. When I needed an extension, I asked and got one. It was what an HOA was supposed to be. I ran into Ron at the clubhouse in December. He said the insurance carrier had renewed coverage after the board completed the reforms. He said it cost the association almost $30,000 in legal fees, refunds, and management changes, but it was worth it because the whole neighborhood was calmer. He said Melissa's enforcement had been driving people away, and now properties were selling faster and values were up. He said he wished they had acted sooner, but nobody wanted to confront her. I said I understood. He said thanks for forcing the issue. I said I just wanted to live in peace. That spring, I got a letter from one of the homeowners Melissa had targeted. She thanked me for standing up to the board and said she had been ready to sell her house because the harassment was so bad. She said the neighborhood felt different now, lighter, like people could breathe. She said she hoped I stayed. I wrote back and said I planned to. The state HOA office finished their investigation in June. They found that the Beacon Hill Board had violated multiple governance statutes and issued a formal reprimand. They required the board to publish the findings and adopt mandatory training for all officers. The board complied. The new property manager made sure everyone followed the rules. The association stabilized. I never saw Melissa again. I heard she moved to another state. I heard she tried to join the HOA board there and got voted down. I heard her new neighbors looked her up online and found stories about Beacon Hill. I do not know if any of that is true. I do not care. She is gone, and the neighborhood is better without her. If you want more stories about standing up to HOA abuse and neighborhood tyrants, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. The funny part came later. One of the board members told me that after Melissa left, the insurance carrier sent a follow-up email praising the board for acting quickly and reducing risk. The email specifically mentioned selective enforcement and said that stopping it was the key to maintaining coverage. Melissa had spent months screaming that her enforcement was about safety, and the insurance carrier said stopping her enforcement was what made the neighborhood safe. The board printed the email and posted it in the clubhouse lobby. It stayed there for months. I saw it every time I picked up my mail. It made me smile. The HOA stopped selective enforcement after complaints piled up. Karen's credibility collapsed in front of witnesses. The whole thing ended because an insurance risk warning made the board panic. Melissa Young said it was about safety, and the insurer email said stop. That was the payback, cold and documented and absolutely final. I still work for the city parks department. I still drive the same blue truck. I still shovel my own walk and clear my own driveway. The difference is that now I do it without someone standing over me with a clipboard and a stopwatch, inventing violations and threatening fines. I do it because it needs to be done, not because some compliance chair with a vendetta says I have 15 minutes or I fail. The neighborhood is quiet now. People wave when they drive past. Kids play in the snow without someone timing how long the sleds are left on the lawn. The HOA does what it is supposed to do: maintain common areas and enforce reasonable rules, and nothing more. It took a fight to get there, but it was worth it. Keep your cool, and I will see you next time.